Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I think we'll just get started. For the Learn About Using ArcGIS with Digimap Data webinar. I think everyone can hear me, but if you want to just use, there's a little hand in the top right hand corner. If you can just click on that just to say that you can hear me okay, that would be fine. Okay, that looks good. At least some people there can hear me okay. So just to kind of get started, my name's Guy McGarver. I'm part of the EDINA Geo User Support team. I'll be assisted by Tom Armitage, also part of the team, and he'll be answering any questions you have that you might want to ask during the webinar. So if you've got any questions, please use the questions tab in your control panel to ask any questions, and then we can answer those either in real time or later on we can post those to you. Just a couple of admin things. So after the webinar, we'll be recording this and we will put this up on YouTube so that you can get a copy of it or listen to it again or send it on to others. There'll also be the slides will be available and transcript of any questions and answers that we get as well. And at the very end there'll be a feedback form which would appreciate if you maybe fill that in and let us know any feedback that you have of this particular webinar. We obviously run quite a lot of these on different topics, so you can either give us some feedback on this webinar, or if you have any suggestions for future webinars, please let us know as well. So what we're going to cover today, just in this kind of brief half hour that we've got, is kind of just what data is available, particularly for use within ArcGIS from Digimap, and then how do we use that data, or how do we get the data from data download for use within ArcGIS? What format should we pick? How do I load the data into ArcGIS? How do I style the data? And then some future resources. So we're kind of going to assume that one, that you know a little bit about Digimap and what it offers. There's obviously other webinars and other help materials if you need to find out more about Digimap itself. And also I'm going to assume a little bit of knowledge of ArcGIS and just some of the tools that they have and some of the things that you can do with the data there. So we won't be going into a lot of detail about how to use ArcGIS. It will just be about kind of getting the data into ArcGIS from Digimap. So that's kind of what we're going to cover. I'm assuming, as I say, people know about Digimap, your Digimap users, and this is the normal access to Digimap through the home page. So you would go to the home page here and then you'll see all the different collections of data. And obviously, for all the different data collections, you've got different types of data within there. I won't go through all of them about how to get every different type of data into ArcGIS. You kind of can assume that if you can do it for one type of data in one collection, then you can get the same sort of data from a different collection. So we'll just be taking some examples, mostly from the Ordnance Survey collection, but those are equally applicable to other collections. So if we're talking about vector data, then you can get vector data from the geology or marine collections and use it in exactly the same way as you would the Ordnance Survey data. And similarly with raster data, we can deal with raster data from any of the different collections in the same way. So this is just sort of kind of a brief overview of kind of the data that's available from Digimap that you might want to use in a GIS, in ArcGIS specifically. From Ordnance Survey, there's the full range of OS maps, but including OS Master Map and all the OS open data products as well. From Historic, we've got the detailed OS maps. They're all in raster formats. In Geology, we've got the online, onshore and offshore geological data. In marine, we've got the marine and coastal zone data, environment, land cover data sets from CEH, so that's for different periods. Aerial, there's the aerial imagery, colour imagery, high resolution colour imagery of the whole of the UK, and in the LiDAR dataset we've got high resolution LiDAR from the Environment Agency and other suppliers. So I say I won't be going through all of these, but to kind of assume that if you can do this what we're going to show, getting the data into ArcGIS, you can deal with all these different collections and different types of data. Some of them there's a few little tweaks, like the LiDAR data is slightly different, but overall you can deal with the data the same way. Of course, you might not have access to all of these data sets. Depending on what collections your particular institution subscribes to, then you might not be, you'll only have access maybe to a subset of this data anyway. So how do I download data? Well, the first thing is in each collection you'll see a various, if you select the Ordnance Survey here, we've got different applications. There's always a roam and a data download application. And what we'll be dealing with here exclusively really is the data download application. And what we're going to do, if you look at the collections at the moment, it's slightly different to this in this picture here, because we're in the process of releasing a new version of the data download, and it will be there, but it will be labeled data download beta. My examples here will be using the existing data download, so the one you're familiar with, but if you want to go and try any of these, getting the data with the new data download, then feel free to go and do that. Please do that and give us any feedback, because we're just in the process of releasing that as a beta, and that will eventually replace the existing data download. So have a look at that, even though at the moment I'm going to be using the what we're calling the old data download, or the existing data download. And again, there are these for all the different applications, different collections, you've got these applications. So in data download, the kind of basic steps, I'm not going to go into this in a whole lot of detail, but really you select an area, you choose your data, and then you add that data to the basket. And that's really the process all the way through. But what we need to do here when we're saying we're going to use this data in ArcGIS specifically is kind of think particularly about the third option there. When you add it to the basket, sometimes you have options within the basket to change the format, the version and the layers, and that can either make it easy for you to get the data into your GIS. It can save you processing the data once you've got it in your GIS. For instance, you can select only a subset of the layers that you're interested in. In that case, you don't then need to filter the data later on in the GIS itself. So it's worth thinking, what are you going to do with this data? What data do I need? Okay, now what options do I have within data download to make my life easier later on? So if we go in and just look at, here's an example of a basket of data that we've selected in data download. So we see here we've got various products. We've got topography, which is the master map topography data set. We've got a building heights data set, and we've got some OS open map local data set. And you'll see that in different columns here we've got some different options. The ones that you're really interested in, one is the version. Version just gives you the ability to take either the most recent data or a historical version of the data. So it might be that you've been doing some work with some data from maybe a year ago in ArcGIS and you want to add another bit of data to that. Then you probably want to take the data from the same period or replace the whole data set with something new, in which case you can then choose the specific period of data that you want. The other important thing that you can choose is the format. As you probably know, different GIS can accept data in different formats, and the most common format for ArcGIS is shapefile or file geodatabase. Here we're showing some OpenMap Local, which is available as shape, and GML. GML is the format that we get supplied often by Ordnance Survey. Shapefile is often one that we'll have converted the data to just to make it more usable in ArcGIS or other GIS. Most GIS can also accept shapefiles as well. So even if you're using QGIS or something else, then it's obviously quite a good idea to take a shapefile or a file geodatabase. With a GML data, you would need to convert that data so that ArcGIS can read it, and we'll kind of show you how you can do that for master map data as well. What we can also do sometimes is select layers. So within topography, for instance, I can show we've got layers. Within that, there are subsets of the data, so the things like buildings, roads, rivers, and if you're only interested in the roads or the rivers, then you can just select that data set directly. And again, that just saves you having to download too much data, deal with data that you don't need to deal with. So if you don't need the data, there's no point in taking it, basically. But these options vary between the different map products. So it's just an idea to think, okay, different map products will be in different formats, but what are the basic formats that I am really interested in? So as I've said, with ArcGIS, the main formats you're really interested in are shapefile, if it's available, or a file geodatabase. So for some formats, for instance, master map topo and building heights, we only supply a file geodatabase as well as other formats, but we don't supply it in shapefile, for instance. We only supply the file geodatabase. So if it's a choice between file geodatabase and GML, for instance, then for ease you would use file geodatabase. There are some reasons sometimes that you might want GML, and there are tools available within ArcGIS provided by Esri UK that handle that, and you can still use that, but unless there's a good reason for using GML, the easiest option is to use file geodatabase, and if it's available, shapefiles. That's for vector data. For raster data, it's again the sort of similar ideas. There are some basic formats which are easier to use than others in ArcGIS. The easiest one often is TIFF. So just if you just want a backdrop map or some imagery, then we've got TIFF. For DTMs and for some other products, then there's an ASC file, which just stands for an ASCII text file. And again, ArcGIS can read those fine as well. So that's really kind of the formats that you're looking for, either if you're looking at vector data or raster data. You're kind of looking to see, are these formats available, and if so, that's going to make your life easier. And we've done that for most data sets. I wouldn't say there are a couple of data sets that we still haven't converted. Some of the network data sets where we've only got the GML data, and really if you're going to create a network, that's probably the best starting point anyway. So the thing to do is to first of all to check the format availability, and within data download you can look at each product, and next to each product there's an info button, and that info button, if you click on that, will bring up some product information, and one of the entries is the data format, and you'll see here we've got vector map local, and there's GML2, DWG or shape. Where we've got a little star, it just means that we have actually generated this data, so we've produced it ourselves from the data we've got supplied by Ordnance Survey. And in this case, as I said, you look at that and go, right, I want this in ArcGIS, therefore I'm going to take the shapefile format. That's going to be much more easy to use. DWG, it could read it, but that's more for your CAD files, and like AutoCAD or something like that, you would use DWG. But for our purposes, we would take the shapefile. So we've got this data. This is available. This will tell you for every product what's available. And when you get that data, so what does it look like? So say I've asked for a shapefile. Now this might be common to you, but some people it's quite confusing this. A shapefile, when we say we're going to deliver this data as a shapefile, what we really mean is it's going to be a series of files, at least 4, usually more than 4, depends what the data is, but there's usually a group of files which make up what is kind of, I suppose, simplistically called the shapefile. So here we've got a DBF, a PRJ, an SHP, and an SHX. Together they form the shapefile. And the thing that you have to remember when you get the data is that you need to keep these files together. So you can't separate them out, you can't put them in different folders, you can't split them up or rename them. You have to keep them together, otherwise it's not going to work. We'll supply the data inside a zip file. So the only thing you need to do when you get your data from data download, if you've asked for a shapefile, you'll get a zip file, unzip the zip file, and you'll then end up with a folder with multiple files within it. And if you just leave that alone, then everything should work okay. But you just have to remember not to split them up. So that's for shapefiles. Slightly different one is master map topography. This is the very large scale data, and for reasons of, because of its size, because of the kind of complexity of it, we recommend you take file geodatabase for this data if you're going to use it in ArcGIS. We don't supply it as shape files because the files would be too big. File geodatabase can scale so that you can ask for larger areas and get all the data. The alternative is to take GML, but that requires further processing. And you'd only do that if you need to, for instance, merge several orders together or load it into a relational database. So maybe you need to load it into PostGIS or Oracle or some other database that you're going to manage the data in. Then generally you could use GML for that, and there's specific loaders for your particular environment that you would have. For instance, if you really wanted to use GML in ArcGIS Desktop, then you can use what's called the Productivity Suite from Esri UK. And that should be available in your institution, and that will allow you basically to convert the GML data into a file geodatabase. So it kind of does exactly what we've already done, but it gives you a little bit more control over that. You can select particular data types to load, so you might just want the topographic lines, and that would be one way of doing that, would be to use Productivity Suite. So there are some reasons for doing that, but generally nowadays, unless there's a good reason, file geodatabase is probably the easiest way. There's also one thing to note, where it is really necessary is where you're going to build a road network using ITN data. So if you're going to take the ITN data to build a road network, so say you want to do a drive time analysis, then taking the ITN data and using Productivity Suite to convert that is much easier than doing it any other way, because all the tools are already built into Productivity Suite to do that. So that's kind of how you deal with some vector data. With some raster data, again, I've said TIFF is your kind of go-to format, or ASC for DTM and gridded bathymetry data. But TIFF is a very standard format that comes for backdrop mapping, for rasters, for aerial imagery, for different types of raster. It'll usually contain a world file, although some of the data is what we call GeoTIFF and has the georeferencing embedded in it. And so you don't need the world file for that. But if there's a TFW world file with the data, then you need to keep that data together with the original data. And sometimes you might need to specify the coordinate system. Come on to this a little bit more, but the coordinate system of all the data that we supply from Digimap I think apart from some of the data in Marine Digimap, is in Ordnance Survey GB 36, so British National Grid. If anything ever, if you need to specify the projection, then it'll be British National Grid. If you want to know more about formats and conversion, there is a guide that we provide in part of our help pages, and it will tell you for each product how to get the data into an Esri product and other GIS systems as well. So we'll give that for every different product, and that gives you a kind of an overview guide for everything and all the different options for doing that. So I'm not sure quite how you're aware of what kind of Esri software there is now, but there's maybe two versions of ArcGIS that you can have access to. There's desktop, which is the kind of traditional version. It might be called ArcMap, includes ArcCatalog, ArcScene, various other components. And then there's also a new product called ArcGIS Pro. And it just depends at your university how things have been rolled out, but both of these products are the same, are available. Generally, they're doing the same sort of job. ArcGIS Pro is just a more modern version that's been rebuilt for newer machines. It just depends what you say, what your university has got available. You can also have access to ArcGIS Online, which is an online GIS version. And again, all of these products will accept either shapefile or file geodatabase in some form or other. So it's worth just looking to see each of the different products, how you would use shapefiles or file geodatabases in them. But the resources data layer files will work with both desktop and Pro. Just as a quick poll here, it would be useful just to know where people are in terms of using desktop applications. So I've just got a quick poll here of what GIS you actually use in terms of ArcGIS. So it would be useful just to find your answer to this. So I'll just pop up this poll quickly. So just getting some answers here. So it looks, as far as I can see at the moment, most people are using desktop still. So that's kind of what I would expect. At the moment, I think it's just early days for Pro, although I think that's something that's going to come along. But it shouldn't really affect what data you get from us. It's just you can use things like, if you're going to look at, say, the building heights in 3D, then you would want to maybe use Pro to do that because it can then view things in 3D. You can look at 3D views for that. For getting the data in, it's basically very simple. You just load up ArcGIS, use the Add Data button, select the folder where you put the downloaded data that you've unzipped, and in that folder you'll either have your shapefile or your geodatabase or your raster datasets, and then you can just select that. Sometimes you can also drag and drop some files into ArcView as well, and to ArcMap. So for instance, with a raster data, you might find you've got a folder called NZ, it's the OS tile, and then within that you've got the different tiles of TIFF data within that. And even though there'll be a TFW with these, it'll just show you the TIFF files. So you just select one or more of these data sets, say add, and it will automatically add that to your map. It will, in some cases, as I said, ask for a spatial reference. So it just needs to know what the projection is, and you can do that using ArcCatalog to do that. A shapefile, again, similar idea. You might look at a folder that you've unzipped. It says NT. Then within that, you'll have we'll have split it all up into different layers. So these layers, there are things like building lines, points, roads. You can select one or more of these shape files. So it'll just show the SHP file, although there'll be these other files associated with them as well. And so you can select one or more of those layers. All of the layers will give you the whole data set. And then you can just say, maybe you can look at that data. So you might load that, and it might come in looking like this, and you go, oh, well, that's not really what I was looking for. This is just all of the data. It will come in with a default representation. If it's a shape file, it will just be points, lines, and areas generally, and it'll just pick any sort of color. So the idea then is that you then have to apply your own styling to this data. And generally we provide, or there is some styling available for each product that we supply. So that's it without styling. I'll go on to styling in a minute. If we were just talking about a file geodatabase, again, it would be similar to that. You would just say, select the GDB file here, go into that. Within that, there are then different layers, and you would just select whatever layers you want to view. And again, when you load that into ArcMap, you would come up with some basic styling. It would just be points, lines, and areas with a default style. So what we'd want to do is, if just as a kind of go back and say, if nothing appears or you don't see the data, then the easiest thing to sort of make sure you've loaded the data and it's there is to do a right click on one of the products and just say zoom to layer, and that will then work out the extents of the data that you've loaded and zoom into that. And that will just allow you to make sure you've actually got the data loaded and to recenter the data on your window. So once you've got some data in, say the vector data, then you want to do some styling on that. And I say we're going from this points, lines, area to something that's actually a bit more like our maps that we're used to looking at. Maybe looking like it does in Digimap. For every product, I say we provide some styles, or we provide links to some styles. So you can go to this, I won't go through it all here, but this URL here, which you can look at later, how to apply style files or layer files. So you can take pre-built layer files and just apply them to the data to get that representation. And I say, if you look at the help pages for each product, you'll find links either to layer files that we've created or layer files that are provided by Ordnance Survey themselves. And you can then use those for the data. We're kind of running a little bit out of time here, so I won't go through this in a lot of detail, but just to say there's obviously within ArcMap there's lots of options there for setting up the representations, I say loading ones that we already supply. And they're always in the data information pages for each product. So if you go back to data download, look at that info button that we talked about earlier, and at the bottom of that product information there's a link to another page which has links to the style files. Like this here. So this is the help page. At the bottom we've got more info, and then here we've got links to, say, ArcGIS. If we've done that in a shape file, then we've got layer files for that as well. So all that information's there. You can get the layer files and you can apply them to set up your symbology, or you can set up your own symbology, or you can use the existing one and modify it as you want. Other sources of style files, so I said Productivity Suite. If you download the data, if you convert the data using Productivity Suite, then there are some style files supplied with that. If you use other software like Interpose, then it gives you style files. So there are different tools, and usually there's some styling associated with those as well. I'll skip this poll here. This was just kind of asking what different data sources you use, but I'm assuming most of you get Digimap. There's also other sources of base maps, things like the Esri base maps. There's data.gov, there's your own data obviously as well. I won't go into this in, again, too much detail, but as I said, all the OS data is in British National Grid. Most of the other data is also in British National Grid, except some of the marine data, which is in WGS 84. Just as because that's the kind of standard format that they use for that. But all the OS and most of the other data is British National Grid. So it's always worth checking if you're starting to merge data together, use different data, use some of our data together with the Esri base map data, then you might have to apply some transformations to that to make sure that it all displays correctly. And we've written some help on that. There's a page within our help pages on transformations in ArcGIS so that you can see how to set up different transformations. Otherwise, you might end up with something like that this here. So we've got some aerial imagery, or the base map imagery, which is from Esri base maps, and that is in WGS 84. Our OS data is in OSGB 36. We overload these together. If we don't select any transformation, then we'll get these errors of about 100 meters in the data. So that's not what you want. So you need to have you need to apply a transformation to that data to make sure that it fits together. There's lots of other tools which I'm not going to go into again in any detail. Things like merging, mosaicing, clipping data. It's all just about getting what data you want together. And again, there's help pages in our help pages. If you go to this here, the standard ArcGIS functions, and there's various help pages on that. So that's just kind of a little bit of an overview, just to kind of warn you or let you know that this is the new version of data download. So at the beginning I showed you the kind of old version. The new version is like this. It's very similar, does exactly the same. The basket is the same. You again have the choice of formats the same way, GML, DWG, file geodatabase. So it might look a little bit different, but actually underneath it does the same things. We're going to add some enhancements to this as well, though, to do with clipping the data on export. So you might not need that clipping to do that within the GIS itself. So that's that. Resources. Within the Resource Center, if you go to the Digimap homepage, you'll see a tab called Resources. You can look in here and there's a section, there's a section called GIS CAD Resources, and in there's ArcGIS. And that's where all these help pages I've been talking about, transformations and various other things, you can find information about that either in the ArcGIS or the datum transformations locations within that. There's also lots of exercises that we've provided, so working with GIS and CAD in the learning and teaching zone. If you want to just go through some exercises, we've got some basic ones for ArcGIS Pro now, so you can maybe, if you've not used Pro and you want to kind of have a little introduction and see how it compares to desktop, then you can run some of those exercises. We've got comparison ones there, how to do it in Pro, how to do it in desktop, how to do it in online using the same data. So that can be a useful introductory exercise. If you need any help with anything, getting the data from data download or using it in ArcGIS, then feel free to contact us either through our chat or email, and we'll try and get back to you and get some help. So really that's all I was going to cover today. Sorry it's been maybe a little bit rushed at the end there. We're kind of, it always seems to take a little bit longer, but hopefully that's given you a little bit of information about getting data into ArcGIS. I say if you have any questions, then feel free to contact us, but anyway, or if you've got any questions, you can ask any questions through the GoToWebinar interface here. I'm not sure if Tom's been answering anything It doesn't look like it at the moment, but you can also ask some questions through there as well for the next few minutes. But anyway, thanks for listening, and I say all these resources will be available online probably in the next couple of days, so you'll get an email informing you of that, and then you can go and have a look, and I say all the links that are in there and everything else you can follow as well. So hopefully that's been of use. There'll be a poll I think at the end of this, if you could just maybe answer that, but thanks for listening, and say look forward to some of the other webinars that we're doing, and see you later.